I used to think freedom meant having choices. Now I know better. Real freedom is knowing which choices will trap you forever, and I learned that lesson 8,000 miles too late, in a country that felt like paradise until it became my cage. They say you can't put a price on peace of mind, but I did. I traded mine for a woman's smile and a signature on papers I couldn't read. The worst part? I'm still here, 3 years later, watching the same sunset through bars I built myself. Every morning I wake up in this beautiful prison, and every night I lie awake knowing exactly which moment I lost everything. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't violent. It was just one choice, one stupid, hopeful choice that seemed so simple at the time. If our stories resonate with you, don't forget to like, comment, and tell us where you're watching from. I'm sitting in my small room in Chiang Mai right now, staring at legal documents covered in Thai script that might as well be hieroglyphics. The papers are scattered across my tiny kitchen table, yellowed at the edges from 3 years of handling, 3 years of desperate hope that somehow I'd find a loophole, a way out, a miracle that would restore what I'd lost. My name is Marcus Chen. I'm 54 years old, and I used to be a construction foreman in California. Used to have a house with a 2-car garage and a backyard where I grew tomatoes every summer. Used to have a pension that would have let me retire at 62 with dignity. Used to have a 401k that represented 30 years of careful saving, of putting away 10% of every paycheck, even when money was tight. Now I have these papers and the growing realization that I've become exactly what I swore I'd never be, another foolish Farang who gave everything to a woman who saw him coming from a mile away. The irony isn't lost on me. I spent 30 years building other people's dreams, laying foundations that would last generations, framing houses that families would call home for decades. I knew how to read blueprints like other people read novels, how to spot weak materials from across a construction site, how to build something that would stand up to earthquakes and time and whatever else life threw at it. But when it came to building my own future, I couldn't see the cracks in the foundation until the whole thing came crashing down around me. The property deed in front of me is beautiful, I'll give it that. Embossed with official government seals and signatures in flowing Thai script, printed on heavy paper that feels important in your hands. But it's also my death warrant, the document that sealed my fate and locked me into this situation I can never escape. My signature is right there in black ink, confident and bold. The signature of a man who thought he was making the smartest decision of his life. 3 years ago, I was a different man entirely. Bitter, yes, because the divorce had been brutal and expensive and had left me questioning everything I thought I knew about love and commitment. But I was still hopeful underneath all that bitterness, still believing that somewhere out there was a second chance with my name on it. My ex-wife Linda had taken half of everything in the divorce settlement, which was her legal right but still felt like a knife in the gut after 30 years of marriage. The other half went to lawyers who charged $400 an hour to argue about who got the good china and whether I deserved to keep my fishing boat. 30 years of marriage, gone in 6 months of paperwork and court appearances. 30 years of building equity in a house that we'd bought when we were young and optimistic and thought we'd grow old together on that front porch. 30 years of saving for retirement, of putting money into accounts we'd planned to live off when we were too old to work, when we'd travel and visit grandchildren and maybe buy a little cabin in the mountains. All of it reduced to a stack of legal papers and a cashier's check that wouldn't even cover a decent apartment in San Diego for more than a few months. I was 51 years old, alone for the first time since I was 21, and looking at another decade or more of swinging hammers and supervising crews before I could even think about slowing down. My body was already telling me it was tired of the physical demands of construction work. My knees ached when I got out of bed in the morning, my back seized up if I bent wrong, and I needed reading glasses to see the fine print on blueprints. That's when I discovered the YouTube videos that would change my life forever. It started innocently enough, the way these things always do. Late nights when I couldn't sleep in my cramped studio apartment, scrolling through my phone and finding these channels about American expats living in Thailand. Men who'd made the leap, who'd cashed out their American lives and started over in Southeast Asia. Paradise for pennies, they called it, and they had the videos to prove it. I watched for hours, sometimes until dawn, mesmerized by these guys who seemed to have cracked the code on how to live well on very little money. American men my age, some older, some younger, all talking about how they'd found happiness and purpose in Thailand. Beautiful weather year-round, no need for expensive heating bills or winter clothes. Food that cost less than a McDonald's meal back home but tasted like it came from a five-star restaurant. Apartments with pools and gyms that rented for less than I was paying for my studio in a sketchy part of town. And the women. God. The women in these videos were something else entirely. Young, beautiful, smiling, hanging on these ordinary American guys like they were movie stars. Thai women who seemed genuinely happy to be with Western men, who appreciated them for qualities that American women had stopped valuing years ago. These weren't supermodels or bar girls or professionals looking for sugar daddies. They were regular women teachers, nurses, office workers who preferred dating Western men because we were supposedly more loyal, more family-oriented, more willing to commit to long-term relationships. You don't need much to live like a king here. One guy said, in a video I must have watched 20 times. He was standing on his balcony overlooking a tropical paradise, mountains in the distance, palm trees swaying in the breeze. His girlfriend was cooking something that smelled amazing in the background, and she looked up and waved at the camera with a smile that could have powered the entire city. $40,000 could last you 5 years, maybe more if you're smart about it, and you'll live better than you ever did back home. I did the math on my phone calculator, adding up my cashed-out $401k, my pension buyout that the union had reluctantly agreed to, and the small inheritance from my father who died the year before the divorce. It came to exactly $179,847.23 after taxes and penalties. Not enough to retire comfortably in California, where a decent one-bedroom apartment cost $2,000 a month and a trip to the grocery store could easily run $100. But in Thailand, according to these videos, it could be a fortune that would let me live like royalty for the rest of my life. I spent 3 months researching every detail, watching every video I could find, reading every forum post and blog article about expat life in Thailand. I learned about visa requirements and tax implications and the best places to live. I memorized exchange rates and cost of living comparisons and the names of hospitals that catered to Western patients. I studied maps of Bangkok and Chiang Mai and Pattaya, trying to decide which city would be the best fit for a middle-aged American starting over. Chiang Mai kept coming up in my research as the perfect destination for retirees and expats. Cheaper than Bangkok, but still modern enough for Western sensibilities, with reliable internet and Western restaurants, and a large community of other foreigners who'd made the same decision I was considering. The mountains surrounding the city reminded me of home, and the temples and culture seemed authentic, but not overwhelming. It felt like a place where I could blend in, where I could build a new life without standing out as just another sex tourist or digital nomad. The decision to liquidate everything wasn't easy, but it felt inevitable once I'd seen what was possible. I cashed out my $401k and took the early withdrawal penalty, which hurt but seemed like a reasonable price to pay for freedom. I convinced the union to let me buy out my pension at a reduced rate, arguing that I needed the money for medical expenses. I sold my truck, which had been paid off for years and was worth more than I'd expected. I sold my tools, decades worth of carefully chosen hammers and saws and levels that had been extensions of my hands. Everything I'd accumulated over 30 years of working went into that cashier's check. My buddy Jake thought I was having a complete mental breakdown and tried to stage what amounted to an intervention. "You're gonna regret this, Marcus," he said, helping me load the last of my belongings into a storage unit I'd rented by the month. You don't just throw away 30 years of your life and move to some third-world country because you saw it on YouTube. What happens when you get sick? What happens when you run out of money? What happens when you realize you can't come home? But I wasn't listening to his warnings. I was already gone mentally. Already living in my head on a beach somewhere, drinking cheap beer and watching the sunset with a woman who wouldn't nag me about leaving dishes in the sink or working too many hours overtime. I was dreaming of a life where my money actually mattered, where I wasn't just another aging construction worker counting down the days until his body gave out completely, and he had to figure out how to survive on Social Security. I was dreaming of freedom, real freedom, the kind that comes when you realize you can reinvent yourself completely in a place where nobody knows your history or your failures or your limitations. I was dreaming of being young again, or at least feeling young again, in a country where 50-something American men were considered catches rather than leftovers. The flight to Bangkok was the longest 13 hours of my life, and not just because of the physical discomfort of being crammed into an economy seat that seemed designed for someone half my size. I sat there with $180,000 in traveler's checks in my carry-on bag, everything I owned in the world either in that bag or in the 2 battered suitcases I'd checked at the counter. No return ticket, no safety net, no plan beyond finding an apartment and figuring out how to make my money last until I could establish some kind of routine. The guy sitting next to me was reading a guidebook about Thai culture, highlighting passages about respect and patience and the importance of not losing face in social situations. I should have been doing the same thing, should have been studying the language or the customs or the unwritten rules that govern interactions between foreigners and locals. But I was too excited, too nervous, too focused on the adventure that was waiting for me on the other side of that long flight. Bangkok hit me like a physical force when I stepped off the plane. The heat was unlike anything I'd experienced in California, thick and humid and heavy with the smell of incense and cooking food, and millions of people living their lives in close proximity. The noise was overwhelming: car horns and motorcycle engines and vendors shouting in a language that sounded like music to my untrained ears. The colors were more vivid than anything I'd seen outside of movies, bright oranges and deep reds and gold that seemed to catch and reflect light from every surface. The taxi driver who picked me up at the airport spoke broken English, but made up for it with enthusiasm, pointing out temples and markets and landmarks, while chattering about the city like a tour guide who genuinely loved his job. I nodded and smiled and tried to take it all in. But I was overwhelmed by the sensory overload of this alien world I'd chosen to call home. Everything was different: the architecture, the signs, the people, the very air itself. I felt like an astronaut who'd landed on a planet that was almost but not quite like Earth. I spent my first week in a hotel near Khao San Road, the famous backpacker district that I'd read about in guidebooks. It was exactly what I'd expected, and nothing like what I'd prepared for pure chaos disguised as organized fun. Street food vendors set up on every corner, selling things I couldn't identify, but that smelled absolutely incredible. Tuk-tuks weaved through traffic that seemed to follow rules I couldn't understand. Young travelers from all over the world stumbled around getting drunk and loud and having adventures they'd remember for the rest of their lives. I wasn't young anymore, wasn't looking for that kind of adventure, but there was something energizing about being around all that life and possibility and optimism. I ate meals that cost less than a cup of coffee back home but tasted like they'd been prepared by master chefs. I bought clothes from street vendors for a few dollars that would have cost me 50 times that in any American mall. I started to believe that maybe Jake was wrong. Maybe I wasn't having a breakdown. Maybe I was having the breakthrough I'd been searching for without even knowing it. After a week of playing tourist and getting my bearings, I took an overnight bus to Chiang Mai. The journey was long and uncomfortable, but it gave me time to think about what I was really doing, what I was really hoping to find in this new life I was creating. The bus was full of locals going about their daily business, and I was struck by how normal it all seemed. These weren't exotic people living exotic lives. They were just people, workers and students and families trying to get from one place to another, trying to make their way in the world just like people everywhere. Chiang Mai was everything the videos had promised and more. Smaller than Bangkok but still cosmopolitan, with a perfect blend of ancient culture and modern convenience. Mountains surrounded the city like protective walls, and temples seemed to appear around every corner, their golden spires catching the morning sun like beacons. The expat community was visible but not overwhelming: Western faces in coffee shops and restaurants, English voices mixing with Thai in the markets, a sense that foreigners were welcome but not necessary. I found a serviced apartment in the Niman area, a modern building with a pool and a gym and reliable air conditioning. The monthly rent was about $400, which would have been maybe 1 week in a comparable place back home. The apartment was small but clean and modern, with a kitchen I could actually use and a balcony that looked out over the city toward the mountains. For the first time since leaving California, I started to feel like I might actually be able to make this work. The first month was like falling in love with life all over again. I explored temples that had been standing for centuries, marveling at the intricate carvings and the peaceful atmosphere that seemed to permeate these sacred spaces. I learned to navigate the street food scene, pointing at dishes I couldn't pronounce and discovering flavors I'd never experienced. I made friends with other expats at the Sunday market, guys who'd made the same leap I was making, who were generous with advice and warnings and invitations to join their social circles. There was Tom, a retired high school teacher from Oregon, who'd been in Thailand for 5 years and seemed to know everyone in the expat community. He introduced me to the best restaurants and the most reliable visa agents, and the doctors who spoke English. There was Pete, a former software engineer from Australia who'd burned out on the corporate world and decided to live on his savings while figuring out what he really wanted to do with his life. There was Ray, a divorced guy from Texas who'd met his Thai wife through a dating website and seemed genuinely happy in a way that made me believe this whole adventure might actually work out. They all had stories about why they'd left their home countries, all had reasons for choosing Thailand over other possible destinations, and all seemed to have found what they were looking for. They warned me about common scams and cultural misunderstandings and the importance of keeping some money in reserve for emergencies. But they also painted a picture of a life that was simpler and cheaper, and somehow more authentic than what any of us had left behind. But it was the attention from local women that really made me believe I'd found some kind of paradise. Not just their beauty, though they were undeniably beautiful, but the genuine interest they seemed to show in Western men. Walking through the night market, I'd catch smiles and little waves from vendors who seemed happy to see a foreign face. In restaurants, servers would practice their English with me, asking about America and laughing at my clumsy attempts to speak Thai. After 30 years of marriage to a woman who barely looked up from her phone when I walked into a room, this kind of attention was intoxicating. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be noticed, to be appreciated, to be seen as interesting rather than just familiar. These women treated me like I had stories worth hearing, like my opinions mattered, like my presence was a gift rather than an obligation. It was probably just good customer service and cultural politeness, but it felt like something more, something I'd been missing without even realizing it. That's how I met Sirada, and that meeting changed everything that came after. I was eating alone at a Western-themed restaurant called Buffalo Bill's, trying to work up the courage to order something more adventurous than a cheeseburger and French fries, when she approached my table with a smile that seemed to light up the entire restaurant. She was small, maybe 5'2", with long black hair that she wore in a simple ponytail and dark eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She wore the restaurant's uniform, a red checkered shirt and denim shorts that reminded me of old Western movies, but she carried herself with a confidence and grace that made her seem older and more sophisticated than her 24 years. "Excuse me," she said, her English careful but clear, each word pronounced with the kind of precision that comes from studying a foreign language seriously. "You are American, yes? I am practicing English for my night school class. Would you mind if I practice with you? Only if you have time, of course." I looked up from my menu, probably with my mouth hanging open like an idiot, struck not just by her beauty but by something else I couldn't quite name. She seemed genuinely interested in talking to me, genuinely curious about who I was and where I came from. Back home, women my age looked right through me like I was invisible, like I was just part of the furniture. Here was this gorgeous young woman asking for my help, treating me like I had something valuable to offer, like my time and attention were worth something. "Sure." I managed to say, gesturing to the empty chair across from me, "I'm Marcus, from California." "Oh, California," she said, her eyes lighting up with what seemed like genuine excitement. "Like Hollywood? I love American movies very much. Do you work in the movie business?" I had to laugh at that. "No, nothing that exciting. I'm in construction. I build houses." "You build houses?" she said, and I swear she looked impressed rather than disappointed. "That is very important work. Very strong work." She made a little gesture like she was feeling my arm, which made me laugh again. "In Thailand, we have great respect for men who build things, who work with their hands. It shows good character." The conversation flowed easier than I'd had with anyone in years. Her name was Sirada. She'd been working at Buffalo Bill's for 2 years while putting herself through night school to improve her English, and she had dreams of someday opening her own restaurant. She asked about my life in America, about California and what it was like to live there, about why I decided to come to Thailand. I found myself telling her things I hadn't planned to share about the divorce, about feeling lost and purposeless, about looking for a fresh start in a place where I could reinvent myself. "You seem lonely," she said at one point, and it wasn't a question but a statement delivered with such gentle understanding that it almost brought tears to my eyes. I understand lonely. It is very hard to be alone in a new place, even when that place is beautiful. Sometimes especially when it is beautiful, because then you wish you had someone to share the beauty with. When my food arrived, she didn't leave to attend to other customers the way I'd expected. She stayed and continued talking, asking about American food and my family, and my plans for the future in Thailand. Other diners needed attention, but she seemed more interested in our conversation than in doing her job efficiently. When her shift finally ended, she asked if I wanted to see the night market. "I will show you the real Thailand," she said with a conspiratorial smile. "Not the tourist Thailand that they show in guidebooks. The Thailand where real people live and work and dream." We walked through the Saturday night market together, her hand occasionally touching my arm to guide me through the crowds or point out something interesting. She introduced me to vendors she knew, translated the names of dishes I'd been curious about but afraid to try, negotiated better prices for things I wanted to buy. I felt like I had a personal guide, someone who actually cared about my experience, someone who wanted me to fall in love with her country the way she seemed to be falling for me. At the end of the evening, standing outside my apartment building under a sky full of stars, I'd never seen so clearly in light-polluted California. She looked up at me with those dark eyes and said something that hit me harder than I'd expected. "You are a good man, Marcus. I can tell. I feel safe with you, safer than I have felt with any man in a long time. Thank you for letting me practice my English, but more than that, thank you for listening to me like what I say matters." I walked up to my apartment that night feeling like I was floating 6 inches off the ground. I'd been in Thailand for 6 weeks, and I'd just met a woman who seemed to see something in me that I'd forgotten existed. She was young and beautiful and intelligent and kind, and she was interested in me, not my money or my visa status or what I could do for her, but me as a person. I fell asleep that night with her smile burned into my memory and her voice echoing in my head. "You are a good man, Marcus." Over the next few weeks, Sirada and I fell into a routine that felt as natural as breathing. I'd come by the restaurant most evenings when she was working, order something simple, and sit at the same corner table where she could talk to me between serving other customers. When her shift ended, we'd explore the city together, ancient temples where monks still lived and prayed, bustling markets where vendors sold everything from hand-carved furniture to exotic fruits I'd never heard of, quiet coffee shops where she'd practice her English, and I'd practice the Thai phrases she was patiently teaching me. She was an excellent teacher, patient with my terrible pronunciation and encouraging when I got frustrated with my slow progress. When I finally managed to order a meal in Thai without embarrassing myself too badly, she clapped her hands like I'd just won an Olympic medal. When I stumbled through my first conversation with a taxi driver entirely in Thai, she beamed with pride, like I was her own personal success story. She told me about her family parents who lived in a small village about an hour outside Chiang Mai, younger siblings she was helping to support through her job at the restaurant, dreams of someday saving enough money to open her own place, where she could serve the traditional northern Thai food her grandmother had taught her to make. I told her about my life in California, about the construction business and the satisfaction of building something permanent and useful, about the divorce that had left me feeling like a failure at the one thing I'd thought I was good at. "In Thailand, we have a saying," she told me one evening as we sat by the river watching the sun set over the mountains. "My Penrai, it means no problem, but it is more than that. It means don't worry about things you cannot change. You cannot change your past, Marcus. You can only work to make your future better." It was exactly what I needed to hear from exactly the person I needed to hear it from. Here was this wise, beautiful woman telling me that my past didn't define me, that I could start over, that I deserved happiness regardless of my previous failures. I was falling in love, not just with her but with the possibility of becoming the man she seemed to think I already was. The physical relationship developed slowly and naturally. without pressure or expectation on either side. A little hand-holding as we walked through the market. A gentle kiss goodnight outside my apartment building. Eventually, nights spent together in my small apartment, talking until dawn about our dreams and fears and the strange paths that had brought us together. She was gentle and patient and tender in ways that Linda had never been, treating me like I was precious rather than just convenient. Linda and I had stopped being physical long before the divorce papers were filed, our relationship reduced to logistics and scheduling and arguments about money. We'd shared a bed but not intimacy, a house but not a home, a life but not love. With Sirada, I felt desired again, needed again, like I had something to offer beyond a steady paycheck and reliable presence. But even in those early days, when everything felt perfect and full of possibility, there were moments that should have been warning signs if I'd been thinking with my head instead of my heart. Little things that didn't quite add up, conversations that seemed to have hidden agendas, questions that felt more like fishing expeditions than genuine curiosity. She'd steer conversations toward money in ways that seemed casual but happened too often to be accidental. In America, houses must be very expensive, yes? You must have saved much money to afford a house in California. Or, Thai people always worry about security, about having enough money for family emergencies. American people must be very lucky to have so much wealth. She'd mention her family's problems in ways that weren't quite asking for help, but seemed to be testing my reaction. My little brother is very smart, but my family has no money for university. In Thailand, if you are poor, your children stay poor unless someone helps them. Or, my mother has been sick, but good medical care costs too much for people like us. Sometimes I worry about what will happen to her. I dismiss these moments as cultural differences. In Thailand, I told myself, family obligations were taken more seriously than they were in America. Financial security was a legitimate concern for a young woman from a rural village who was trying to support herself and help her family at the same time. She wasn't being a gold digger about it, she was just being practical, just being honest about the realities of her situation. At least that's what I convinced myself at the time. The first time she actually asked me for money, it was for her younger brother's school fees. $500, she said, and she'd pay me back as soon as she got her next paycheck from the restaurant. She cried when she asked, clearly embarrassed by the request, explaining that her father had been sick and unable to work in the rice fields, that the family was struggling to make ends meet without his income. "I am so sorry to ask you this," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks in what seemed like genuine shame and desperation. "I have never asked a boyfriend for money before, but I don't know what else to do. My family depends on me, and I cannot let my brother lose his chance at education because we are poor." I gave her the money without hesitation. $500 was nothing to me at that point, maybe 2 or 3 days of work back in California, but it was obviously everything to her family. She was so grateful, so relieved, that I felt like a hero. She threw her arms around me and kissed me like I'd just saved her entire family from disaster, which maybe I had. "You have saved us," she whispered in my ear. "I will never forget this kindness. You are more than boyfriend to me now, you are family." But the requests kept coming after that, slowly at first, but with increasing frequency. Her mother needed medication that wasn't covered by the government healthcare system. Her sister needed money for her upcoming wedding, which would be a disaster for the family's reputation if they couldn't afford proper celebrations. The family's motorcycle had broken down, and they couldn't afford repairs, which meant her father couldn't get to work even when he was feeling well enough. Each time, Sirada would approach me with tears in her eyes, clearly ashamed to be asking again, promising that this would be the last time, swearing that she'd find a way to pay me back even though we both knew her salary at the restaurant wasn't enough to cover these kinds of expenses. "I hate that I have to keep asking you for help," she'd say, her voice breaking with what seemed like genuine anguish, "but my family has no one else to turn to. You are the only person who can save us from these problems." Each time, I'd give her what she asked for, telling her not to worry about paying me back, that I was happy to help people I cared about. I was starting to feel like a provider again, like I had a purpose beyond just existing day to day, in my comfortable but meaningless routine. Here was a family that needed me, that appreciated me, that saw me as the solution to problems that would have been impossible for them to solve on their own. I was the American with deep pockets who could make their financial worries disappear with a simple bank transfer. I was the generous boyfriend who understood that love meant taking care of the people who mattered to the person you loved. I was the hero who could swoop in and fix things that were broken, just like I'd been doing with houses and buildings for 30 years. 3 months into our relationship, I was feeling confident enough to meet Sirada's family. She'd been mentioning them constantly, telling me how excited they were to meet the American who was making their daughter so happy, how grateful they were for the help I'd provided during their recent difficulties. We took a Songthieu, a converted pickup truck that served as public transportation to her village, about an hour outside Chiang Mai, on roads that got progressively worse as we moved away from the city. The village was exactly what I'd expected from watching travel documentaries and reading guidebooks: rice fields stretching to the horizon, simple wooden houses built on stilts to protect against flooding, chickens and dogs wandering freely through dirt roads where children played games I didn't recognize. It was poverty, but it was clean poverty, dignified poverty, the kind that comes from hard work rather than laziness or addiction. Sirada's parents greeted me with shy smiles and respectful ways, the traditional Thai greeting that shows respect by pressing your palms together and bowing slightly. They spoke almost no English, but their warmth was unmistakable and immediate. They'd prepared a feast for my visit, inviting neighbors and extended family members to come meet the American who was dating their daughter. Tables had been set up in the yard under tarps to protect against the sun, and the amount of food they'd prepared seemed impossible given what I assumed were their limited resources. I was treated like visiting royalty. The men gathered around me, asking about America and my work and my impressions of Thailand, with Sirada translating questions and answers that became increasingly animated as the beer flowed. The women fussed over me constantly, making sure my plate was never empty and my beer was always cold, giggling when I attempted to compliment their cooking in my broken Thai. Children stared at me with wide-eyed curiosity. I was apparently the first American some of them had ever seen in person. I felt welcomed and accepted in a way I'd never experienced, even in my own family. These people barely knew me, but they were treating me like a son, like someone who belonged, like someone whose presence was a gift rather than an obligation. My own parents had been distant and critical, more concerned with appearances and status than with genuine connection. Linda's family had tolerated me at best, always making it clear that they thought their daughter could have done better than a blue-collar construction worker. But Sirada's family saw me differently. They saw me as a success, as someone who'd accomplished something meaningful with his life, as someone worthy of their daughter's love and their own respect. When they looked at me, they didn't see a divorced, middle-aged man running away from his failures. They saw an American with resources and education and opportunities, someone who could provide security and stability for their daughter and maybe help improve their own circumstances in the process. Sirada's father, a weathered man in his 50s whose hands showed the calluses and scars of decades of farm work, communicated with me through gestures and expressions when language failed. He showed me his rice fields with obvious pride, explaining through Sirada's translation how the flooding cycles worked and why this year's crop was particularly promising. He showed me his simple tools, a wooden plow that looked ancient, hand-forged sickles that had been sharpened so many times they were half their original size, and demonstrated techniques that had been passed down through generations. Through Sirada's translation, he told me about the challenges of farming in a world where weather patterns were becoming increasingly unpredictable, where fertilizer costs kept rising while rice prices stayed flat, where young people were leaving rural areas for cities and leaving their parents to work the land alone. But he also told me about the satisfaction of providing food for people, of continuing traditions that connected him to his ancestors, of working with his hands to create something useful and necessary. My father says, "You are a good man," Sirada translated as we watched the sunset over the rice fields. He says he can see in your eyes that you understand hard work, that you respect what it means to build something with your hands. He is very happy that his daughter has found someone who will take care of her and treat her with kindness. The family's acceptance was overwhelming and intoxicating. Here were people who had never left their small village, who had never traveled more than a few hours from where they were born, but they were welcoming me into their home and their hearts like I was already part of the family. When we left that evening, loaded down with fruits and vegetables from their garden and promises to return soon, I felt like I'd found something I'd been searching for my entire life, without even knowing it, a place where I belonged. People who valued me for who I was, rather than what I could provide. The requests for money became more frequent and more substantial after that family visit, not just from Sirada, but from various family members who would call with emergencies that required immediate financial assistance. Her mother called one evening, crying about medical bills for tests that had revealed a serious condition requiring expensive treatment. Her brother called to explain that he'd been offered a job that required him to buy a motorcycle for transportation, but he didn't have the money for a down payment. Her sister's husband called to say he'd lost his job and they needed help with rent to avoid being evicted. Each request came through Sirada, who would translate their desperate pleas and look at me with hopeful eyes that seemed to carry the weight of her entire family's financial security. I was no longer just her boyfriend. I was their lifeline, their connection to resources they could never access on their own, their insurance policy against the kind of poverty that could destroy families and dreams. "My mother is so scared about her health," Sirada would explain after translating one of these calls. "The doctors say she needs surgery, but it costs more money than our family has ever had at one time. She says she would rather die than ask you for help, but I told her that you are generous and kind and would want to help if you could." I gave them what they asked for, every single time. It wasn't really about the money at that point. I had plenty, more than I could spend on myself in years of comfortable living in Thailand. It was about being needed, being appreciated, being seen as someone who could solve problems and make life better for people I was learning to love. Every transfer I made, every emergency I helped solve, made me feel useful in a way I hadn't experienced since the divorce destroyed my sense of purpose and self-worth. But somewhere in the back of my mind, a voice that sounded suspiciously like my buddy Jake was whispering warnings that I didn't want to hear. The money was flowing out faster than I'd anticipated when I'd made my careful budget back in California. Between my own living expenses, which were still quite reasonable by American standards, the increasingly frequent gifts to Sirada's family, and the small loans I'd started making to other expats who'd hit temporary rough patches, my financial cushion was shrinking more rapidly than I'd planned. I was still comfortable, still had plenty of money left to maintain my lifestyle for years to come, but the rate of spending was accelerating in ways that made me nervous when I actually sat down and calculated the numbers. I'd come to Thailand with $180,000 and had already spent more than $40,000 in less than 6 months. At this rate, my savings would last maybe 5 years instead of the 10 or 15 I'd originally planned for. When I mentioned these concerns to Sirada during one of our evening walks along the river, she was understanding but didn't seem particularly worried about the financial implications. "Money is for spending, Marcus," she said with the kind of philosophical certainty that comes from growing up poor. "We invest in family, in relationships, in building a future together. Money comes and goes, but family lasts forever. In Thailand, we believe that when you help others, the universe finds ways to help you in return." It was a beautiful sentiment, the kind of wisdom that sounded profound when delivered by someone as lovely as Sirada in a setting as romantic as a tropical riverside at sunset. And it aligned perfectly with the values I'd been trying to embrace since leaving my old life behind: generosity over selfishness, community over individualism, love over money. But it also made me nervous in ways I was having trouble articulating, even to myself. I'd spent my entire career being careful with money, saving for the future, building security against uncertainty and emergency. This new approach felt reckless and dangerous, even if it was philosophically appealing and emotionally satisfying. I was trading financial security for social acceptance, investing my retirement savings in relationships that felt real and meaningful but might not actually be what they seemed. 6 months into our relationship, with my savings account noticeably lighter but my heart fuller than it had been in years, I decided to propose to Sirada. Not with a diamond ring, which I'd learned from my research wasn't traditional in Thai culture, but with a beautiful gold necklace that had cost me more than I'd ever spent on jewelry, but seemed appropriate for the occasion. Gold was what Thai women valued. Gold was what showed serious intentions, Gold was what proved that a man was ready to make a real commitment. I'd planned the proposal carefully, choosing a spot by the river where we'd had so many meaningful conversations, timing it for sunset when the light would be perfect and romantic. I'd even practiced what I wanted to say in both English and Thai, though I knew my pronunciation was still terrible, and I'd probably have to fall back on English for the important parts. "Sirada," I said, taking her hands in mine as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed almost too beautiful to be real. "I love you more than I've ever loved anyone. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, here in Thailand, building something beautiful together. Will you marry me?" She said yes, but not in the way I'd expected or hoped for. Instead of throwing her arms around me with joy and excitement, instead of crying happy tears and covering my face with kisses, she looked thoughtful and almost calculating, like she was running numbers in her head or considering implications I couldn't see. "Marcus," she said carefully, "I love you very much too. You have made me happier than I ever thought possible. But if we are going to marry, if we are going to build a life together, we need to think about security. We need to think about having a real home, a place that belongs to us, a foundation for our future and for the family we might have someday." I told her I understood completely, that I wanted nothing more than to provide for her and for us, and for whatever children we might be blessed with. That's when she brought up the subject that would ultimately change everything, though I had no way of knowing it at the time. "In Thailand," she explained patiently, "foreign people cannot own land. It is the law. And it cannot be changed, no matter how much money you have or how long you live here. But Thai people can own land, and when we marry, I will be able to own land for our family. We should find beautiful property, build a house exactly the way we want it, make a real home together where we can grow old and be happy." The idea excited me more than I'd expected. I'd been living in rented apartments my entire adult life, first with Linda in places that never quite felt permanent, then alone in a series of temporary spaces that were comfortable but never truly mine. Owning property would give me roots in Thailand, would make me a legitimate resident rather than just a tourist with a long-term visa. It would be an investment in our relationship and our future, proof that I was committed to staying in Thailand and building a life with Sirada. "How much would something like that cost?" I asked, trying to sound casual while my mind raced through the possibilities. "For good land in a nice location, maybe 1 million baht, she said, watching my face carefully for reactions. "For land with a house that we could renovate and expand, maybe 2 million baht. It sounds like very much money, but in American dollars, it is not so expensive. And we would build equity, make investment in our future instead of paying rent that disappears forever." I did the math quickly in my head. 2 million baht was roughly $60,000 at current exchange rates, a significant chunk of my remaining savings, but also a fraction of what the same property would cost in California. It was more money than I'd ever spent on anything except my house back home, but it was also an investment rather than an expense, a way to stop throwing money away on rent and start building something permanent and valuable. The more I thought about it, the more sense it made from every angle. I'd be investing in property in a country where real estate values were rising steadily. I'd be creating a home base that would anchor me to Thailand and give me a sense of belonging I'd never experienced as a renter. Most importantly, I'd be making a concrete commitment to Sirada and our future together, proving that I was serious about spending the rest of my life with her. But there was one significant complication that I understood intellectually but hadn't fully processed emotionally. As a foreigner, I legally couldn't own land in Thailand. The property would have to be purchased in Sirada's name, which meant trusting her with the largest financial decision of my life. She would own the land and the house completely, while I would have no legal claim to property I'd paid for entirely with my own money. When I hesitated and asked about this arrangement, Sirada took my hands and looked into my eyes with an expression of such sincerity and love that my doubts melted away like ice in the tropical sun. "Marcus," she said softly, "I understand that this is scary for you. It would be scary for me too, if I were in your situation. But when we marry, what belongs to me belongs to you also. I will put the land in my name because the law requires it, but it will be our land, our house, our future together. I would never do anything to hurt you or take advantage of your trust. You are my heart, my future, my everything. The tears in her eyes looked completely genuine. The trembling in her voice sounded absolutely real. Everything about her demeanor suggested that she was asking for trust rather than setting up some elaborate scam. I'd spent 6 months getting to know her, meeting her family, building what felt like a deep and authentic relationship. She'd had dozens of opportunities to ask me for money directly, to take advantage of my obvious infatuation with her, to disappear with whatever she could get from me. Instead, she was proposing a partnership, a shared investment in a future we'd build together. She was asking me to trust her with my money, but she was also offering to trust me with her heart, her body, her future, her reputation in her family and community. It felt like the kind of mutual commitment that real relationships were built on. "Okay," I said, surprising myself with how easy the decision felt once I'd made it. "Let's do it. Let's buy some land and build our home together." Her smile was radiant and transformative, lighting up her entire face in a way that made her even more beautiful than I'd thought possible. She threw her arms around me and kissed me with a passion and enthusiasm that felt like pure joy, whispering, "Thank you," over and over in my ear like I'd just given her the greatest gift imaginable. "You have made me so happy, Marcus," she said when we finally broke apart. "We are going to build such a beautiful life together. We are going to be so happy in our own home, in our own place where no one can tell us what to do or how to live." We spent the next few weeks looking at properties with the excitement and intensity of newlyweds, which in a sense we were. Sirada seemed to know everyone in the real estate business, or at least everyone who dealt with properties in the price range we were considering. She had friends who knew about land for sale, family members who could recommend good deals, connections who could help us navigate the complex bureaucracy of Thai property law. We looked at rice fields that could be converted to residential use, at plots near the mountains with stunning views and complete privacy, at small farms with existing houses that could be renovated and expanded to meet our needs. Each property had potential and problems, advantages and drawbacks, possibilities and limitations. I found myself imagining our future in each location, where we'd put the garden, how we'd expand the house, what the view would look like from our bedroom window. It was the most fun I'd had since arriving in Thailand, maybe the most fun I'd had in years. I felt like we were playing house in the best possible way, making decisions together, planning a shared future, building something that would last. Every property we visited brought us closer together as we discussed what we liked and didn't like, what we could afford and what was beyond our budget, what felt like home and what felt like just another house. Finally, we found the perfect place. It was about 20 minutes outside Chiang Mai, down a dirt road that wound through rice fields and small villages where children waved at passing cars and old men sat in the shade playing checkers. 2 acres of land with a small but well-built traditional Thai house, surrounded by mature fruit trees and offering views of the mountains that took my breath away every time I looked at them. The house needed significant work. The kitchen was too small, there was only 1 bathroom, and the electrical system looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. But it had good bones, solid construction, and a layout that could be expanded and improved without losing its essential character. The land was fertile and private, with enough space for gardens and workshops and whatever other projects we might want to pursue. Standing in the yard for the first time, looking at the mountains in the distance and listening to birds I couldn't identify singing in the fruit trees, I could picture our future with perfect clarity. I could see myself expanding the house, maybe adding a workshop where I could build furniture or pursue woodworking hobbies I'd never had time for during my working years. I could see Sirada tending gardens where she'd grow the vegetables and herbs she used in her cooking. I could see us growing old together in this peaceful place, surrounded by beauty and tranquility and the simple pleasures of rural life. "This is it," I said to Sirada as we stood together watching the sunset from what would become our front porch. "This is home." She nodded with tears in her eyes, squeezing my hand so tightly it almost hurt. "We will make it beautiful, Marcus. We will make it perfect for us. Exactly what we want. Exactly what we dream of." The negotiation process was conducted entirely in Thai. with Sirada handling all the discussions while I stood by and tried to follow conversations that moved too quickly for my limited language skills. The sellers were an elderly couple who were moving to Bangkok to live with their children, and they seemed genuinely sad to be leaving the property where they'd spent most of their adult lives. They wanted 1.8 million baht for the land and house, which seemed reasonable based on other properties we'd looked at. Sirada proved to be an excellent negotiator, patient and respectful but firm about getting a fair price. She spent hours talking with the sellers, learning about the property's history, understanding why certain improvements had been made, and what problems might need to be addressed. By the time the negotiations were finished, she'd talked them down to 1.6 million baht, about $48, and had gotten them to agree to leave behind some furniture and tools that would save us money and time. "I take care of you," she said proudly, after shaking hands with the sellers and confirming the final price. "I make sure you get good deal. Make sure nobody cheats you because you are foreigner and don't know local prices." I was impressed by her business sense, her ability to read people and situations, her skill at finding the right balance between friendliness and firmness that seemed to characterize successful negotiations in Thai culture. Having her handle the process made me feel protected and cared for, like I had a partner who would look out for my interests even when I couldn't look out for them myself. The legal process of buying property in Thailand turned out to be significantly more complicated than I'd anticipated, full of regulations and requirements and bureaucratic procedures that seemed designed to confuse and frustrate foreigners. When I suggested that we should hire our own lawyer to review the documents and explain the process, Sirada assured me that her cousin was a lawyer who could handle everything for us at no charge. "He is family," she explained. "He will make sure everything is done correctly, make sure all papers are legal and proper. Why should we pay stranger lawyer when we have family lawyer who cares about our success?" She would take care of all the paperwork, all the translations, all the bureaucratic details that were beyond my ability to understand or navigate. All I had to do was sign where she told me to sign and transfer the money when everything was ready. It seemed like a reasonable division of labor. She handled the local complexity, while I provided the financial resources that made the whole thing possible. "Trust me," she said when I expressed some nervousness about signing documents I couldn't read. "I know how to do this correctly. I will protect you and make sure everything is done according to law." I should have insisted on hiring my own lawyer, someone who worked for me rather than for Sirada's family. I should have demanded word-by-word translations of every document, even if it took days and cost hundreds of dollars in translation fees. I should have taken the time to understand exactly what I was signing, what rights I was giving up, what protections I did or didn't have under Thai law. But I was in love, deeply and completely in love, in a way I hadn't been since I was young and stupid and thought love could conquer any obstacle. I was trusting, not just in Sirada but in the whole process, in the idea that good intentions and honest communication could overcome legal complexity and cultural differences. And I was eager, desperately eager, to start this new phase of our life together, to stop being a renter and become an owner, to stop being a visitor and become a resident. When Sirada handed me papers to sign, I signed them without hesitation. When she explained what various documents meant, I believed her completely. When she assured me that everything was being done legally and properly, I took her word for it without question. I was completely dependent on her honesty, her competence, her love for me, and I never doubted any of those things for even a moment. The day we signed the final papers was one of the happiest days of my life, right up there with my original wedding day and the day I got my contractor's license back in California. We went to the land office in Chiang Mai, a grey concrete government building that smelled of cigarettes and photocopier toner and the kind of bureaucratic inertia that seems universal regardless of country or culture. The process took most of the day: forms to fill out in triplicate, documents to review and verify, fees to pay to various officials whose exact function in the process wasn't entirely clear to me. I sat in uncomfortable plastic chairs for hours, signing papers covered in Thai script that might as well have been ancient hieroglyphics, while Sirada handled all the translations and negotiations and explanations. "This paper confirms that you are providing money for purchase," she'd explain patiently. "This paper says that land will be registered in my name according to Thai law. This paper says that you understand and agree to all legal requirements for foreign people in Thailand. I signed everything she put in front of me because I had no choice and no alternative. I couldn't read Thai, couldn't understand the legal language, couldn't navigate the bureaucracy without her help and translation. I was completely dependent on her honesty and competence, trusting that she would protect my interests even when I couldn't protect them myself. When the process was finally completed and we walked out of the government building with a deed in Sirada's name and a receipt showing that I'd transferred $48.000 from my bank account to complete the purchase, she was practically glowing with excitement and pride. "We did it, Marcus," she said, throwing her arms around me right there in the parking lot, while other people smiled at this obvious display of young love. "We have our own home now. We have our own land, our own future, our own place in Thailand." I felt triumphant and accomplished, like I'd just completed the most important transaction of my life. I'd bought property in a foreign country, established permanent roots in Thailand, made a concrete commitment to my new life and my relationship with Sirada. The deed might have been in her name for legal reasons, but it was our property, our investment, our shared future made tangible and real. I was no longer just a tourist with a long-term visa or an expat living in rented accommodation. I was a property owner, a resident with a genuine stake in the country I'd chosen to call home. I had a place that belonged to me, or at least to us, a foundation on which we could build whatever kind of life we wanted to create together. The first few months after buying the property were absolutely blissful, like an extended honeymoon that seemed to get better every day. We spent weekends at the house, planning renovations and improvements, working in the garden, imagining our future in every room and corner of the property. I hired local workers to expand the kitchen, to add a proper modern bathroom, to install air conditioning in the master bedroom, to upgrade the electrical system to handle modern appliances. Sirada supervised all the work with the skill and attention to detail of a professional project manager, translating my ideas and specifications, making sure everything was done to my standards, negotiating with contractors to get the best prices and highest quality. She seemed to know everyone in the construction business, or at least everyone who worked in our area, the best places to buy materials, the most reliable electricians and plumbers, the craftsmen who could do custom work at reasonable prices. We bought furniture together, shopped for appliances, picked out paint colors and tile patterns and light fixtures. Every decision was made jointly, with long discussions about style and function and budget. I felt like we were playing house in the most wonderful way possible, creating something beautiful and personal and perfectly suited to our needs and tastes. Every improvement we made, every detail we added, felt like a step toward the life I'd been dreaming of since I first decided to leave California. The house was becoming ours in the deepest sense, a reflection of our combined vision and shared commitment to building something lasting and meaningful together. Sirada was the perfect partner during this renovation period, involved in every decision but never domineering, helpful with every problem but never condescending. She worked with contractors and suppliers like she'd been managing construction projects her entire life, handling negotiations and scheduling and quality control with impressive competence. Having her by my side made me feel like I truly belonged in Thailand, like I was part of the community rather than just an outsider with money. But even during this honeymoon period, there were subtle changes in Sirada's behavior that I didn't recognize as warning signs because I was too happy and too much in love to notice anything that might threaten my perfect new life. She started spending more time at the property without me, claiming she needed to oversee work or meet with contractors or handle problems that had come up during the day while I was in the city. She'd invite family members to visit for weekends, to help with various projects, to see the progress we were making on our home. The house began to feel less like our private romantic retreat and more like a family compound where relatives were always coming and going, always needing something, always making themselves comfortable in ways that felt increasingly presumptuous. When I mentioned that we seemed to have a lot of visitors and suggested that we might want some alone time to enjoy our new home together, Sirada would look hurt and ask if I didn't like her family or didn't understand Thai culture. "Thai families are very close, Marcus," she'd explain patiently, like I was a child who needed to learn basic social skills. "We share everything with each other. Food, Money, homes, problems, celebrations. They are not visitors in our house. They are family. And this is their family home too now. I accepted this explanation as a cultural difference that I needed to adapt to rather than resist. In America, I'd been used to nuclear families and clear boundaries between households, to privacy and independence, and the right to control who came into your home and when. Thai culture was obviously different, more communal and interconnected, more focused on extended family relationships and mutual support. If having her family around made Sirada happy, if it was part of what made her feel secure and loved and connected to her roots, then I was willing to adapt my expectations and learn to appreciate these relationships that were so important to her. I was the foreigner here, the one who needed to adjust to local customs rather than expecting everyone else to accommodate my American ideas about privacy and independence. But the requests for financial assistance continued and seemed to be escalating in both frequency and amount. Her brother needed money to start a small motorcycle taxi business, an investment that would provide steady income for the family but required an initial outlay for a bike and proper licenses. Her sister's husband wanted to buy a truck that he could use for hauling goods, another business opportunity that would benefit the whole family but needed startup capital they couldn't provide themselves. Her parents needed a new roof before the rainy season started, and the cost of materials and labor was beyond what they could afford on their farming income. Her youngest brother had been accepted to a technical college, a huge opportunity for advancement, but one that required tuition payments the family had never imagined being able to make. Each request came with detailed explanations and business plans and promises of eventual repayment, though we all understood that repayment was more of a hopeful intention than a realistic possibility. And each request was presented by Sirada with tears in her eyes and obvious reluctance to keep asking for help from the generous American who'd already done so much for their family. "My brother has such a good opportunity to improve his life," she'd explain after translating one of these calls. "He has found a route where he can make good money with motorcycle taxi, but he needs to buy bike and get proper license. It costs 80,000 baht, which is so much money for us, but not so much for you. He promises to pay back, but even if he cannot, you will have helped him escape poverty forever." I found myself saying yes every time, not just because I had the money and wanted to help, but because refusing felt cruel and selfish and contrary to everything I was trying to become in my new life. I was supposed to be more generous than I'd been in America, more focused on relationships than on money, more willing to share my good fortune with people who'd had fewer opportunities than I'd been blessed with. I was the family's American, their connection to resources they could never access on their own, their insurance policy against the kind of devastating poverty that could destroy dreams and futures. Every time I helped solve one of their problems, I felt useful and needed and appreciated in ways that made me feel good about myself and confident that I was building something meaningful and lasting. The spending was starting to worry me, though. Between the property purchase, the renovation costs, the ongoing family loans, and my own living expenses, I was burning through my savings much faster than I'd anticipated when I'd made my original budget back in California. I'd come to Thailand with $180,000 and had already spent more than $80,000 in less than a year. At this rate, my money would last maybe 4 or 5 years instead of the 10 to 15 I'd originally planned for. When I tried to discuss these financial concerns with Sirada, she was understanding and sympathetic, but didn't seem to share my anxiety about the long-term implications. "Money is meant to be used to help people we love," she said with the kind of serene confidence that made me feel petty and selfish for worrying about numbers on bank statements. "You cannot take money with you when you die, but the good you do for others lasts forever. In Thailand, we believe that generosity creates good karma that comes back to you when you need it most." It was beautiful philosophy, the kind of wisdom that made perfect sense when delivered by someone as lovely as Sirada in the context of our romantic new life together. And it did align with the values I was trying to embrace, putting relationships above money, caring about people more than possessions, building a life based on love and connection rather than accumulation and security. But it also made me nervous in ways I had trouble articulating, even to myself. I'd spent 30 years being careful with money precisely because I'd seen what happened to people who weren't careful, who trusted too much or spent too freely, or failed to plan for emergencies and setbacks. I'd seen good people lose everything because they'd been generous when they should have been cautious, trusting when they should have been suspicious. 8 months after buying the property, I decided to have a serious conversation with Sirada about our financial situation and our long-term plans. We were sitting on the porch of our house, watching the sunset over the mountains, drinking beer and feeling satisfied with the progress we'd made on the renovations, when I brought up the subject that had been weighing on my mind for weeks. "Sirada," I said carefully, trying to choose words that would express my concerns without sounding accusatory or selfish. "I love being able to help your family, and I want to continue helping them however I can. But I'm starting to worry about our long-term financial security. We're spending money faster than I'd planned, and I need to make sure we're building something sustainable for our future together." Her response surprised me with its intensity and immediacy. Instead of the understanding and discussion I'd hoped for, she seemed hurt and defensive, almost offended that I'd brought up the subject at all. "You think I am wasting your money?" she asked, her voice sharp with an emotion I'd never heard from her before. "You think my family is taking advantage of your kindness? You think I don't understand the value of money because I come from poor village?" "No," I said quickly, realizing that I'd somehow stepped into dangerous territory without meaning to. "That's not what I meant at all. I just think we need to be more careful about budgeting, more planned about big expenses. I want to make sure we can keep helping your family without putting our own future at risk." "Your money? Or our money?" she asked, and there was something cold and calculating in her voice that I'd never heard before. "What do you mean? We are together now, Marcus. We bought house together, we plan future together, we share everything together. But you talk about money like it still belongs only to you, like I am just your girlfriend who you give allowances to when you feel generous." I tried to explain that I wasn't being selfish or possessive, that I was just trying to be responsible about our shared future. But every word I said seemed to make her angrier and more upset. The conversation spiraled into an argument about commitment and trust, and whether I really saw her as an equal partner or just as a beautiful accessory to my expat fantasy. By the end of the evening, I was apologizing and promising to be more generous and more trusting, more committed to our shared future regardless of the financial implications. I felt guilty for bringing up money at all, for introducing doubt and calculation into what should have been a relationship based on love and mutual support. Looking back now, I can see that this conversation was the turning point where our relationship dynamic shifted from partnership to something much more complicated and potentially dangerous. But at the time, I just felt ashamed of my American obsession with money and security, guilty for not fully embracing the generous spirit that had brought me to Thailand in the first place. The changes in Sirada's behavior became more obvious and more troubling after that conversation, though I still didn't recognize them as warning signs because I was too invested in maintaining the illusion of our perfect relationship. She started treating the property as if it were entirely hers, making decisions about renovations and improvements without consulting me, changing plans we'd made together without explanation or discussion. She'd invite her family members to stay for extended periods, sometimes weeks at a time, transforming our romantic home into a busy family compound where I felt more like a tolerated guest than a co-owner. When I'd suggest that we needed some private time together, some space to nurture our relationship without constant family involvement, she'd look hurt and ask if I was rejecting her culture and her values. "My family thinks you don't want them here," she'd say with tears in her eyes. "They think maybe you don't really accept them. Maybe you just pretend to like them because you want to sleep with me. They are starting to worry that you will change your mind about Thailand, about me, about everything we have built together." I'd end up apologizing and reassuring her that I loved her family and was grateful for their acceptance, that I was just tired from work or stressed about visa issues or adjusting to cultural differences. But the truth was becoming harder to ignore. I was starting to feel like an outsider in my own home, like someone whose presence was tolerated rather than welcomed, like a guest who'd overstayed his welcome but couldn't figure out how to leave gracefully. The house I'd bought was becoming a place where I no longer felt completely comfortable, where my opinions and preferences seemed to matter less and less, where decisions were made around me rather than with me. I was still paying for everything: utilities, repairs, improvements, food for the constant stream of family members who treated the place like a hotel, but I felt like I had less and less say in how my money was being spent. The final confrontation came during a family gathering at the property, a celebration of something I can't even remember now, but that seemed to require a huge party with dozens of relatives and neighbors and friends. There was traditional music and dancing, enormous amounts of food, and drinking that went on late into the night. I tried to participate and be social, but the language barrier and cultural differences made it difficult for me to feel truly included. I found myself sitting alone on the porch for most of the evening, watching the party through the windows like an outsider looking in at a life I'd paid for but didn't really belong to. When the celebration finally wound down and people started leaving, Sirada's father approached me with a serious expression and spoke to me in Thai for several minutes while Sirada translated. He was thanking me for my generosity, for taking care of his daughter, for helping his family during difficult times. But there was something in his tone and his expression that made me uncomfortable, something that felt more like an expectation than gratitude. What exactly did he say? I asked Sirada after her father had left with the last of the relatives. He said, "Thank you for taking care of family," she replied, but she seemed reluctant to provide details. He said, "You are a good man, very generous with family." "Is that all?" She hesitated for a long moment before answering. He also said he hopes you will continue to help family in future. He said family relationships are very important in Thai culture, and when you join family, you accept responsibility to help when family needs help. I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't gratitude for past help. This was a statement of expectation for future support, a reminder that I'd accepted obligations I didn't fully understand when I'd started dating his daughter. I was no longer being appreciated for my voluntary generosity. I was being held accountable for my ongoing responsibilities as a family member. That night, lying in bed next to Sirada in the house I'd bought but increasingly didn't feel was mine, I tried to process what I was really feeling and what it meant for our future together. I'd come to Thailand looking for love and acceptance and a simpler life, and I'd found all of those things in ways that had exceeded my wildest dreams. But I'd also found obligations and expectations and pressures that I hadn't anticipated, a role as the family's financial provider that felt more like a job than a relationship. I was starting to suspect that my value to Sirada and her family was measured primarily in dollars rather than in the personal qualities I'd hoped they'd come to love and appreciate. A year after buying the property, I decided it was time to have the serious conversation I'd been avoiding, the one that would either clear the air and restore our partnership or reveal truths I wasn't sure I was ready to face. I wanted to understand where our relationship was really heading, what Sirada's actual expectations were, what I could realistically expect from our future together. I chose my words carefully, trying to be honest about my concerns without being accusatory or demanding. I told her that I felt like we were growing apart despite living together, that I was worried about the financial pressure and the family obligations, that I needed to understand what she really wanted from me and our relationship. "I love you," I said, taking her hands and looking into her eyes the way I had when I'd proposed. "I want to make this work. I want to build a life with you that makes us both happy. But I need to understand what that really means, what you expect from me, what I can expect from you." Her response was not what I'd hoped for or expected. Instead of reassurance or understanding, instead of a conversation about how we could work together to solve our problems, she became defensive and then angry in ways that revealed aspects of her personality I'd never seen before. "You think I am using you for money?" she demanded, her voice rising with genuine or calculated indignation. "You think everything I have told you about loving you is lie? You think I am some kind of prostitute who pretends to love you for what you can give me?" "No," I said desperately, trying to salvage a conversation that was spiraling out of control. "I just think we need to talk about boundaries, about how we handle money and family obligations, about what we both want from this relationship going forward." "I want security," she said with cold clarity that cut through all the romantic pretense we'd been maintaining. "I want family to be safe and happy. I want a husband who understands that when you love someone, you take care of them and everyone they love. Is that wrong? Is that too much to ask from a man who says he wants to marry me?" No, but you don't want same thing, she continued, and her voice was getting harder and more calculating with every word. You want Thai girlfriend who costs nothing and asks for nothing. You want beautiful young woman who makes you feel young again, but never reminds you that she has family and responsibilities and needs. You want fantasy, not real relationship. The conversation deteriorated rapidly from that point, spiraling into accusations and counter-accusations that revealed how differently we'd been interpreting our entire relationship. She accused me of being cheap and selfish, of not understanding Thai culture, of making promises about taking care of her family that I'd never intended to keep. I tried to explain that I wasn't being cheap or selfish, that I was just trying to be responsible about our long-term financial security, that I wanted to make sure we were building something sustainable rather than just spending money until it ran out. But every word I said seemed to make her angrier and more resentful. She talked about how I'd changed since we'd bought the house, how I'd become suspicious and controlling, how I questioned every expense and made her feel like she had to justify every request for help. I tried to argue that I'd become more careful, not more controlling, that I was trying to protect our future rather than restrict our present. Finally, she said something that stopped the argument cold and changed everything that came after. This is my house, Marcus. My land. If you are not happy here, if you don't want to take care of family like you promised, then you can leave. I stared at her, trying to process what she'd just said. This is my house. My land. Not our house, not our land. My house. The house I'd paid for, the land I'd bought, the property I'd invested $48,000 of my retirement savings in, it was hers. Legally, officially, completely and irrevocably hers. What do you mean? I asked. Though I already knew the answer and was just hoping I'd misunderstood something fundamental. Land is in my name, she said with a kind of matter-of-fact certainty that comes from having all the power in a relationship. House is in my name. Everything is in my name because Thai law requires it. I own everything. You live here because I let you live here. The words hit me like a physical blow, like being punched in the stomach by someone I'd trusted completely. I'd known intellectually that the property was in her name, had understood that Thai law required foreign property purchases to be structured this way. But I'd never considered that she might use this legal reality as a weapon against me, as a way to end arguments and assert control over our relationship. I'd trusted that we were partners, that the property being in her name was just a technicality required by law, a legal formality that didn't change the reality of our shared investment and mutual commitment. I'd believed that love and trust and good intentions could overcome legal technicalities and cultural differences. But looking at her face, seeing the cold calculation in her eyes, seeing how easily she'd shifted from loving girlfriend to property owner, asserting her legal rights, I realized how completely and naively I'd been fooling myself. She wasn't just stating a legal fact. She was drawing a line in the sand, making it clear who had the power in our relationship and who was dependent on whose goodwill for basic shelter and security. I paid for this property, I said, my voice barely above a whisper because I was afraid of what she might say next. And I am very grateful, she replied with the kind of patronizing politeness that makes gratitude sound like an insult. You gave money, I gave love and companionship and home. But gratitude does not mean I owe you forever. If you are not happy with our arrangement, if you cannot accept Thai culture and family obligations, then you are free to go back to America. That night was the longest and most terrible of my life. I lay in bed next to Sirada, listening to her breathing, trying to understand how I'd gotten myself into this situation and what my options were for getting out of it. I'd come to Thailand with $180,000 and dreams of starting over. Now I had maybe $60,000 left, no legal claim to property I'd bought with my own money, and a girlfriend who just reminded me that I was living in her house by her permission rather than by right. I started doing desperate math in my head, trying to figure out whether I could afford to cut my losses and go home to California. A flight back to the US would cost at least $1,200. I'd need money for a security deposit on an apartment, money to buy a car, money to live on while I looked for work. At 52 years old, with no recent employment history and a year-long gap in my resume, Finding a construction job wouldn't be easy or quick. I'd need at least $20,000 to get back on my feet in America, probably more given how much living costs had increased during my time away. That would leave me with maybe $40,000 to live on while I rebuilt my life from scratch. Not enough to maintain any kind of decent lifestyle while I figured out how to restart a career I'd walked away from. The worst part was that I couldn't afford to leave, but I also couldn't afford to stay on the current trajectory. I was trapped financially and emotionally in a situation that was becoming more toxic and controlling every day. I'd invested so much money and emotional energy in this relationship and this new life that walking away felt impossible, but staying felt like accepting a kind of imprisonment I'd never imagined when I'd bought my ticket to paradise. Over the next few weeks, I started paying much closer attention to the dynamics of my relationship with Sirada and her family, trying to understand how I'd missed so many warning signs and whether there was any way to restore some balance to a situation that had become completely one-sided. I noticed how she'd invite family members to stay at the house without asking my opinion, how she'd make decisions about property improvements and changes without consulting me, how she'd treat me more like a tenant than a partner. When I tried to assert some control over decisions about the house I'd paid for, she'd remind me patiently but firmly that it was her property and her decision to make. When I'd suggest that we needed some private time together without constant family involvement, she'd act hurt and ask why I was rejecting her culture and her values. "You knew when you decided to live in Thailand that family is very important here," she'd say with the kind of patient condescension that made me feel like a child being lectured about basic social skills. "You cannot have Thai girlfriend and American family privacy. If you want to be part of Thai family, you must accept Thai family obligations." I started researching my legal options, visiting lawyers in Chiang Mai to ask about my rights and possible remedies for my situation. The news was uniformly bad and consistently depressing. Thai law was absolutely clear about foreign property ownership, and I'd willingly and legally transferred ownership of the property to Sirada. I had no legal recourse, no way to force her to sell the property or return my money, no protection against her changing the terms of our arrangement whenever she felt like it. One lawyer, a kind older Thai man who spoke excellent English and seemed genuinely sympathetic to my situation, was particularly blunt about my options and prospects. "You made very common mistake," he said with the kind of weary resignation that suggested he'd had this conversation many times before. "You think love will protect you from law, that good intentions will overcome legal reality. But law is law, regardless of emotions or relationships. Your girlfriend owns property completely. You own nothing and have no legal rights to anything." "What can I do?" I asked, though I was already afraid of the answer. "You can leave Thailand and go back to America," he said, "or you can stay and try to work out some arrangement with your girlfriend. But you have no legal power in this situation. You must depend entirely on her goodwill and generosity." I spent days walking around Chiang Mai, thinking about my options and trying to figure out some way to salvage something from the wreckage of my dreams. I could leave Thailand and go back to America to rebuild my life from scratch at 52 years old, with limited savings and no clear plan. I could stay and hope that Sirada's feelings for me would overcome her obvious financial motivations, accepting a subordinate role in a relationship where I had no power or security. Or I could try to find some middle ground, some way to remain in Thailand while establishing clearer boundaries and expectations about my living situation and financial obligations. I chose the third option, swallowing my pride and asking Sirada if we could work out a more formal arrangement that would give me some security while acknowledging the legal reality of our situation. I couldn't afford to leave Thailand and start over in America, and I couldn't continue living in uncertainty about my housing and relationship status. "I want to stay," I told her during a conversation that was among the most humiliating of my life. "But I need to know where I stand, what you expect from me, what I can expect from you. If we're going to continue living together, I need some kind of agreement about the terms." Her answer was brutally honest and completely devastating. "I want you to understand that this is my house and respect that I make decisions about it. I want you to stop acting like you own something that you don't own. I want you to contribute to household expenses and help with family obligations. But I want you to understand that you are guest here. not owner. How much? I asked, though asking the question felt like admitting complete defeat. 15,000 baht per month, she said after thinking about it for a moment. That includes room, utilities, and 1 meal per day. You pay your own expenses for everything else. I did the math with a calculator because I wanted to be absolutely sure about what I was agreeing to. 15,000 baht was about $450 per month at current exchange rates. It was reasonable rent for a room in a nice house in rural Thailand, probably less than I'd pay for comparable accommodation anywhere else in the area. It was also the most humiliating financial calculation of my life. I would be paying rent to live in the house I'd bought with my retirement savings, sleeping in the bedroom I'd paid to renovate, eating meals prepared in the kitchen I'd paid to expand, using the bathroom I'd paid to modernize. I would be a tenant in my own home, a paying guest in the house I'd imagined growing old in with the woman I'd planned to marry. But I didn't have any alternative that didn't involve admitting complete failure and returning to America with my tail between my legs. Okay, I said, hating myself for the words even as I spoke them. But I want everything in writing. I want a rental agreement that spells out exactly what I'm paying for and what my rights are. She looked surprised by the request, maybe even a little hurt. You don't trust me to keep my word? I trust you. I lied, because the truth would have made everything even more difficult. But I want everything clear so there are no misunderstandings or arguments later. The rental agreement we worked out was simple, comprehensive, and absolutely devastating to my dignity and self-respect. I would pay 15,000 baht per month for a small bedroom in the house, with access to shared bathroom and living areas. The rent included utilities and 1 meal per day, prepared according to Sirada's schedule and preferences. I would have no say in household decisions, no right to invite guests without permission, no claim on any improvements I might make to the property. In return, I would have a place to live and the right to stay as long as I paid rent on time and didn't cause problems for Sirada or her family. The agreement could be terminated by either party with 30 days' notice, though we both understood that I had nowhere else to go, while she had dozens of other options for tenants or living arrangements. Sirada typed up the agreement in both Thai and English. We both signed it in front of a local official who stamped it with the kind of bureaucratic authority that made it feel legally binding. And just like that, I became a tenant in my own home. The woman I'd planned to marry had become my landlord. The property I'd bought as an investment in our shared future had become my prison. That was 2 years ago. I've been living under this arrangement ever since, paying rent to stay in the house I bought, maintaining a civil relationship with the woman who manipulated me into giving her everything I'd worked for during 30 years of construction work. It's not the life I dreamed of when I cashed out my 401k and flew to Thailand with visions of freedom and love and adventure. It's not the fresh start I was looking for when I liquidated everything I owned in California and bet it all on a new life in Southeast Asia. It's just survival, day by day, in a situation I can't escape and can't improve, making the best of choices I can't undo and consequences I have to live with for the rest of my life. My daily routine is simple, predictable, and profoundly depressing. I wake up at 6 a.m. in my small bedroom, the same room where Sirada and I used to sleep together when we were lovers instead of landlord and tenant. I shower in the bathroom I paid to renovate, brush my teeth at the sink I chose and installed, look at myself in the mirror I bought and hung on walls I painted. I eat breakfast in the kitchen I expanded, food prepared by Sirada or her mother according to schedules and menus I have no input on. Sometimes it's Thai food that I've learned to appreciate. Sometimes it's simple rice and vegetables. Sometimes it's leftovers from whatever the family ate the night before. I'm grateful for the meal because it's included in my rent, but eating it reminds me every morning of my status as a paying guest rather than a family member. I spend my days doing odd jobs for other expats in the Chiang Mai area, work that pays enough to cover my rent and personal expenses, but not enough to save money for any kind of escape or alternative. I help people with visa runs to the border, translate documents from Thai to English, fix things around their houses that they don't know how to repair themselves. It's not steady work and it's not well-paid work, but it's work that doesn't require a lot of startup capital or official permits. The expat community in Chiang Mai is smaller than you might think. And my story has become something of a cautionary tale that gets shared in bars and coffee shops as a warning to newcomers. I'm the guy who trusted too much, who ignored the red flags, who let loneliness and hope blind him to obvious manipulation. I'm the example other expats point to when they want to scare their friends away from making similar mistakes. Evenings are the worst part of every day. I sit on the porch of the house I paid for, watching the sunset over the land I bought, listening to Sirada's family laugh and talk and make plans in the living room I furnished with my own money. I'm not unwelcome exactly, but I'm not really included either. I'm the American who lives in the back room, the former boyfriend who pays rent to the family, the cautionary tale who serves as a reminder of what happens when you trust too much. Sirada and I maintain a cordial relationship that's probably healthier than what we had when we were pretending to be in love. We're polite to each other, sometimes even friendly, but the romance is completely gone, and we both know it will never come back. How could it? It's hard to feel romantic about someone who owns your home and controls your living situation, someone who can make you homeless with 30 days' notice. We're business partners now in the strangest transaction of my life. She provides housing and utilities and 1 meal per day. I provide monthly rent payments and occasional handyman services. We found a way to coexist that works for both of us, even if it's nothing like what either of us originally imagined when we started dating. Her family treats me with a complex mixture of gratitude, pity, and mild contempt that probably reflects their honest feelings about my situation. They're grateful for all the money I've given them over the years, for the property I bought that provides them with a place to gather and celebrate and support each other. They're grateful for the rent I pay that helps with household expenses and gives Sirada a steady income she doesn't have to work for. But they also pity me, this middle-aged American who made such poor choices, who trusted so completely, who ended up trapped in a situation entirely of his own making. And there's some contempt there too, the kind of disdain that people naturally feel for someone who's been so easily manipulated, who was so blind to obvious warning signs, who gave away his power so completely. I've made a few friends among the expat community, other men who've made similar mistakes and learned similar hard lessons about trust and culture and the dangers of mixing love with major financial decisions. We meet for beers sometimes at the same bars where newcomers come to hear our stories and learn from our failures. There's a sad brotherhood among us, united by shared stupidity and mutual warnings to anyone naive enough to think they can avoid our mistakes. There's Tom, the retired teacher who lost his entire pension to a bar girl in Pattaya, who convinced him to invest in a restaurant that never existed. There's Pete, the software engineer who put his savings into a tech startup with his Thai girlfriend that turned out to be an elaborate scam involving multiple victims. There's Ray, who thought he'd found true love until his wife's real husband showed up at their wedding ceremony with legal documents proving they'd never been divorced. We're a support group of sorts, sharing stories and strategies for surviving in a country that can be beautiful and welcoming and incredibly dangerous for naive foreigners with more money than sense. We try to help newcomers avoid our mistakes, but we also know that lonely middle-aged men in love rarely listen to warnings from bitter expats who've lost everything. The thing is, Tom told me last week over warm Chang beer in a bar that caters to expats who can't afford the tourist prices. We all thought we were smarter than the guys who'd been scammed before us. We all thought we could see the red flags and avoid the obvious traps. The loneliness makes you stupid, Pete added with the kind of bitter wisdom that comes from hard experience. You want to believe so badly that someone genuinely cares about you, you ignore everything that doesn't fit that narrative. You see what you want to see instead of what's actually happening. And the cultural barrier makes it worse, Ray said, finishing his beer and signaling for another. You can't read the social cues. Can't tell what's genuine emotion and what's skilled performance. By the time you figure out the difference, it's too late to protect yourself. The worst part of my situation isn't the money I lost, or the property I can't reclaim, or even the humiliation of paying rent to live in my own house. The worst part is the complete loss of dignity, the daily reminder that I'm living as a charity case in accommodations I bought with my life savings. Every morning when I wake up, every night when I go to sleep, I'm confronted with evidence of my failure, my naivety, my complete lack of judgment about people and relationships. I've thought seriously about leaving Thailand, about cutting my losses and going back to America to rebuild my life from whatever pieces I can salvage. But the math never works out in a way that makes leaving seem possible or practical. I have maybe $35,000 left in savings, not enough to relocate internationally and establish a new life from scratch. I'd be homeless in America, or at best living in some cheap apartment in a dangerous neighborhood, working construction again at 54 with a body that's already showing the wear and tear of 30 years of physical labor. I'd have no health insurance, no pension, no prospects for the kind of retirement I'd been planning before I decided to throw everything away for a woman's smile. At least in Thailand, I have a roof over my head that I can afford, food on the table, and a climate that doesn't require expensive heating or air conditioning. I have friends who understand my situation and a community that accepts me despite my obvious failures. I have a routine that works, even if it's not the routine I'd planned or hoped for. So I stay. I pay my rent on time. I do my odd jobs around the expat community. I maintain my civil relationship with Sirada and her family. I watch the sunset from the porch of the house I'll never own, in the country I chose, but that doesn't really want me. I'm not living exactly, but I'm surviving, and some days that feels like enough. I've learned things about myself that I wish I didn't know, truths about my character and judgment that are hard to accept, but impossible to deny. I've learned that loneliness can make you stupid, that hope can blind you to obvious dangers, that trust is a luxury you can't afford when you're vulnerable and desperate for connection. I've learned that cultural differences can hide mercenary motives, that love can be a transaction disguised as emotion, that generosity can be a weakness that predators learn to exploit. I've learned that some people see kindness as opportunity rather than virtue, that being needed isn't the same as being loved, that providing for someone doesn't guarantee their loyalty or affection. But I've also learned things about resilience and adaptation, about finding small pleasures in a life that didn't turn out the way you planned it. I've learned to speak passable Thai, to appreciate flavors and foods I'd never encountered in California, to find peace in Buddhist philosophy, even when I can't bring myself to believe in reincarnation or karma. I've learned that you can survive almost anything if you're willing to lower your expectations and redefine success in terms that fit your actual circumstances rather than your original dreams. I've learned that dignity is partly about what happens to you, but mostly about how you choose to respond to what happens to you. Most importantly, I've learned that some choices create permanent consequences that can't be undone, only endured. The signature I put on those property papers 3 years ago changed my life in ways that are irreversible and absolute. There's no going back, no do-over, no second chance to make different decisions with the wisdom I've gained from making terrible ones. I made my choice, and now I live with it every single day. Every morning when I wake up in my small room, every evening when I sit on the porch watching the sunset, every month when I hand over rent money to live in the house I bought. The choice is made, the consequences are real, and the only direction available is forward into whatever kind of future I can build from the pieces of the life I have left. The property deed still sits in the kitchen drawer where I keep important documents, though I haven't looked at it in months. The Thai script is still meaningless to me, but I understand now what those papers really represent. They're not just a legal document transferring ownership of real estate. They're a record of the moment I signed away my freedom, my security, and my dignity for the promise of love that turned out to be a business transaction. They're evidence of the day I chose trust over caution, hope over experience, love over logic. They're proof that I'm Marcus Chen, 54 years old, a former construction foreman from California who cashed out his retirement savings and bought property in Thailand that he can never own, that he can never sell, that he can never leave. They're a reminder that I'm exactly where I chose to be, living with consequences I created through my own poor judgment and desperate need for connection. They're documentation of the prison I built for myself, bar by bar, choice by choice, signature by signature. Tomorrow I'll wake up and pay another day's worth of rent to live in the house I bought. I'll do whatever odd jobs I can find to earn money for next month's payment. I'll sit on the porch I paid for and watch the sunset over the land I purchased but can never own. I'll go to sleep in the bedroom I renovated, in the house I expanded, on the property I improved with my own hands and my own money. And I'll do it all again the next day, and the day after that. Because this is my life now. This is what I chose when I signed those papers, when I trusted someone I should have been more careful about, when I let loneliness and hope override common sense and caution. Some stories don't have happy endings. Some choices can't be undone. Some prisons are built by the people who live in them, constructed one poor decision at a time until the walls are too high and the doors are too strong to break through. This is my story, my choice, my prison. I hope it helps someone else avoid the signature I signed, the trust I gave, the consequences I have to live with. Because once you're in, the only way out is through, and sometimes there is no through. Sometimes there's just the long, slow process of learning to survive in the cage you built for yourself, one day at a time, until the day you don't wake up anymore. But maybe that's enough. Maybe survival is its own kind of victory, even when it looks like defeat. Maybe learning to find peace in an imperfect situation is its own kind of wisdom, even when it feels like giving up. Maybe accepting the consequences of your choices, however terrible they were, is its own kind of strength. I'm still here, still breathing, still finding reasons to get up each morning, even when those reasons are small and simple and nothing like the dreams I started with. And maybe that's all any of us can really ask for in the end, the chance to keep going, to keep trying, to keep finding meaning in whatever life we've managed to create, whether it's the life we planned or just the life we ended up with.